You mentioned your family. Tell us about your wife, Ellie.
She is the strength of this marriage. When I married her, she was unsure of her own capabilities. But in the 50 plus years we've been married, that's all changed. She is a strong woman who can do any number of things. She's a photographer. She makes Japanese flower arrangement, which is more difficult to do than you might imagine. She works in ceramics. She belongs to book clubs. And mainly she looks after me. She also looks after our children who are in their 50s. I could hardly believe it.
She says about you that then and now you continue to invoke creativity, boundary pushing, boundary breaking, and many titles of your books most define who you are as a scholar. At one point, she remembers somebody telling you that you would never be able to wear two hats, one in education and one in the arts. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do.
You would have to make a choice. Did this in part inspire you to do even greater things in art education?
I was inspired and am inspired, motivated, maybe more modest word, because I get a rush out of dealing with the problem. For me, it's interesting. And when you do things long enough and thoughtful enough, you change yourself. In fact, the role of education might be conceived of as the invention of yourself. And the tools that you have to work with and the attitudes you bring affect what kind of self you're going to build. Ellie is not who I married. Now, she is who I married, but she is not everything that I married. She's different, bolder, brighter, more articulate, more guts. She's a tough lady. I like that. Most of the time.
In 55 years of marriage, that's a lot of time, just in general. Your son Steve recalls a time that you purchased for him a polo pinstriped three-piece suit at the San Jose flea market. Do you recall that?
Vaguely. We went a lot to flea markets.
I heard.
That's part of the connoisseurship.
Explain that.
Well, when you're looking for things at a flea market, the problem that you have is knowing whether this is junk or whether this is quality, whether this is young or whether this is old, whether this is well formed or whether it's crude. All of those things come into play, and you're making selections on the basis of these criteria. Now, these criteria are integrated in the psyche, not doing necessarily one at a time, but you engage the world according to what you're able to see. There is no selection unless there's some seeing, and seeing is an achievement verb, and looking is a task verb. Tasks tell you what to do, achievement tell you how to accomplish what you're doing.
You're good at making distinctions. Some of your friends and colleagues have mentioned that as well, in terms of connoisseurship. And He said that you were excited to have found a hot bargain for him, and recalls that he had to go into the back seat of this guy's car and try on this polo pinstripe suit. He adds that there is nothing more in life that you enjoy than finding a great bargain. Your friends also mentioned this, and your daughter Linda learned how to best haggle there as well. Tell us about your children.
Well, Linda is one of the most rational people I know.
Mm.
She went into clinical psychology, which she now practices in San Francisco. She could have gone into law. She would have done well. Didn't do it, is not regretful of what she is doing. She's easy to live with, very easy to live with. Steve works for Stanford. He's export licensing officer. He's the director of that department in the university. That department deals with materials that need to be reviewed before they're sent out of the country. So we don't want to send to Saudi Arabia stuff.
Oh, okay. Linda adds that you have an insatiable desire to experience everything life has to offer. We see this in your enthusiasm for antiques, for paintings, ideas, the arts, symphonies, proverbs, poetry, food, and of course, flea markets. Your former student, Bruce Ermacher, added that you also like to predict prices of almost any object. Bruce fondly remembers spending time with you looking at rare and expensive Persian carpets in Seattle, driving from Palo Alto to San Francisco to meet art museum officials at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in your convertible. He also notes your love of sports cars, as does another colleague of mine, Chris Clark at Arizona State University. Your daughter also recalls many times for you were asking her to go for a ride, that you love to drive in your convertible cars. She also fondly remembers the many Papa burgers and baby burgers you shared at the end of the drive at A&W Food. Immediately after graduation, you took this professorship at Ohio State, and then you returned to University of Chicago. Is that correct?
No. After Chicago, returned to Chicago, it depends. Yeah, I returned to Chicago from UCLA.
Okay. Okay. Soon thereafter, you took a position as an associate professor at Stanford University, where you live today, and where you soon became full professor and now continue to serve as Lee Jacks Professor of Education and Professor of Art. What brought you to Stanford?
What brought me to Stanford was the opportunity that I sensed here to do something interesting in a university that was small enough not to have you get lost in the space. See, the alternative to Stanford was UCLA. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I went to UCLA the first time, I let them know that I had an expression of interest in my presence at the University of Chicago. Then I had essentially 2 offers from UCLA, neither of which I took. This was in the late 50s, early 60s. Mm. So if there's anything that I can demonstrate, is that I can hold on to a job.
Definitely. 1967 to now. That's a good,
it's a good stretch.
Years. That's a good stretch. Tell us about your work with the Kettering Project, begun in 1967.
Yeah, the Kettering Project. Anyhow, that paper that I wrote and submitted to AERA won this prize, Palmer Johnson Memorial Award. That's the prize. And this was one of my first publications. I think 2 or 3. No, I had more than that. I had probably 7 or 8 presentations, lectures, papers. One of the things that I wanted to do was to design a set of resources through which somebody could learn to see, for example. I'll give you just 1 or 2 examples. Let's say you want to help kids learn something about the way color changes in different settings. So if you design a card, C-A-R-D, with square holes, they can be round ones. Square hole, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say 5 square holes. And if you take colored paper and put it in the back, the color of the paper you put will look different if you're looking through a yellow field as contrasted with a purple field. Mm-hmm. So helping them understand the variability of color depending on context was a way to sensitize their pursuit of those qualities in paintings and in other things as well. So the idea was to design a curriculum that was filled with manipulables that would open up perception. And that's what we did for 2 years. We needed 5 years, but we did it for 2 years. And that was one big innovative idea, which could be used in designing resources for people to use in order to sensitize them. You see, seeing is all about relationships. I should say that design is all about relationships, and I should say that there is no form, design, that is not about relationships. So, if you imagine a piece of paper with a W, a big W, written on the paper, anytime you put a mark on a surface, you've got a relationship between the mark and the surface. And if you make more complicated that relationship, you make more complicated what perception has to see. This is not limited to the visual arts. This is applicable, this idea about relationships is applicable in science, in history, in English, etc. When I edit the paper, I'm looking for just the right word in a sentence. And just the right word in a sentence means looking hard and being tuned in to what that subtle difference might project if one are looking at it appropriately. I have a friend who I've known for years and who met me at the Art Institute of Chicago a few months ago, longer than that now, a year ago, a year and a half. And I said to him on the telephone, I was talking from home. He was talking from Chicago. I said, you know, why don't we meet? We can meet at the Art Institute of Chicago, and we'll walk around. He says, okay, we can walk around at the Art Institute of Chicago and look at the paintings, but I look at only 2 paintings. I only look at 2 paintings if I go there. Now, why would anybody say that? They got this whole panoply of, because if you're going to look at a painting in order to really see it, it takes time. It is not just a flicking of your wrist or something like that. It's a form of perceptual inquiry in which what is being organized are qualities. The function of a painter and a composer and a dancer is to qualify qualities. Is to qualify qualities. What's a quality? A quality, red is a quality, sweet is a quality, fast is a quality. Before they are anything else, they are qualities. And an artist, I just use art, could use qualifies qualities. That means he takes several qualities and makes one quality out of it. And that can be treated as an independent set of qualities that are adjacent to one another, like a checkerboard, or it can be treated as a mixture of colors which come out with one color that reflects the input of the other qualities. Qualify qualities. That's particularly true in cooking. Where you're using eggs to do one thing, milk to do something else. I like to watch those programs where they make food. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, there was a woman who was showing how to make ice cream, malted, good malted. 3 vanilla ice cream, a little milk, malted, 2 eggs, etc., etc., to make a chocolate malted, a good one. What she's doing is qualifying qualities, and she's taken something that she's learned to do, and she's guiding us in doing what she's learned to do, so we qualify qualities. And to qualify qualities so that they're really qualified and significant, you become a chef.
What you're talking about in terms of qualifying qualities and other things, how do we use that in terms of education and education of the arts, and specifically in our schools?
People who work in the arts, especially, work with qualities. How they work in qualities depends upon the kind of imaginative processes they're able to employ. It depends on the technical skills that they can use to make things happen through the medium that they're working with. The medium is important because the medium mediates. And what does it mediate? It mediates the choices that somebody has given, let's say, given an artist to work with. So getting smart about art is a way of locating possibilities for the imagination to function. We hope that the imagination that's developed through the opportunities it has have an effect on the opportunities people have to make things. By making things, I don't mean tables and chairs only. I mean stories, music, paintings, history. If you can't see what is subtle in a field, you're left with all the rest.
In your books, The Art of Educational Evaluation and The Enlightened Eye, you also talk about the significance of aesthetic judgment and critique along with creation. Can you talk about that a bit?
Aesthetic judgment is making some values that a work may or may not possess. There are two wings, W-I-N-G-S, to performance. In anything made, or in looking at the world. Take that even broader. So one question is, does an individual see what is there to be seen? That's connoisseurship. When you're able to see things that are subtle and complex that people have not noticed. Criticism is the transformation of one's observations into a form that enables other people to see what you've seen. The goal of criticism, said John Dewey, is the re-education of the perception of the work of art. Critics talk about works in order to enable others to see what they have seen, or to see what they want, what they themselves see, as long as it moves the conversation forward. So the problem is to take a look at this picture over here. What do you see?
Harbor.
What?
A harbor.
A harbor. Good.
Water, sky, clouds, sails, colors, lines.
What do you see about the composition, the way it's composed?
Chaos, but order. Shades. Depth. time. Did I pass?
Did you say time?
I said time.
Show me the time.
Progression.
Where do you see the progression?
On the dock. People coming to and from certain points of time.
Good for you.
Did I do well?
You did very well. Compared to most people.
Oh, good.
You have done very well.
Good for a statistician too, huh?
So what you want to do is to move through that image, and you just scratch the surface, and say something about how it works, how that painting works, what's going on. There's a verticality, for example, that you take a look. You see the vertical thrust?
Yes.
And then there's a horizontal coming through.
Yes.
And you see the top of the picture.
Yes.
It's quite different than the rest of it. So it's got a relief there up at the top edge. See how soft the color is compared?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And the use of the negative space.
Good for you. Those principles could be applied to a classroom, how it's organized, what are the dominant pressures on kids to do one thing versus do another. You want to take the thing apart and put it back together, being able to say to somebody, this is what's here that I see, what do you see? So connoisseurship is the art of perception. Criticism is the art of the disclosure. Through criticism, we see more than we would have seen without having access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can criticism close you off? Sure, it can. But you can guard against it. Being able to locate the referent is what effective criticism enables you to do.